12 days and counting. The clock's ticking on COP26 and the climate. Boris Johnson urges the world to act now, and Joe Biden makes a new pledge to cut emissions. From David Attenborough, a message of encouragement.
We must use this opportunity to create a more equal world. And our motivation should not be fear, but hope.
The royals too ramp up the pressure. Prince Charles kicking off the conference. William and Kate meeting young campaigners for change. While outside, Greta Thunberg led protesters questioning the leader's credentials. So, the big names then are all here and the talking is underway. But will COP26 prove to be anything more than just hot air? Also ahead, what caused the Salisbury train crash which left 13 in hospital and a driver with life-changing injuries? And
what's all this then?
Sustainability. I'm reducing food miles.
A message of soap, the TV favourites uniting to save the planet.
From Glasgow, this is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening from Glasgow, where the eyes and indeed the hopes of the world are upon global leaders trying to save the planet from climate change. Opening the summit, Boris Johnson said the world is strapped to a doomsday device, like in a Bond movie, and the future generations will not forgive us if we fail. The head of the United Nations warned we're still heading for climate disaster. Either we stop it or it stops us. But there was a stark reminder, too, of the challenges ahead. India pledged to target net zero emissions only by 2070. That's 20 years later than hoped. And the leaders of China and Russia, two of the world's other big polluters, are not even here. Here's our deputy political editor, Anushka Astana, on A Moment of Truth.
It was a friendly start to COP26 for Boris Johnson today, bumping elbows with the leaders of the United States, Australia and India. All smiles perhaps, but with a critical need to wrap up a deal in Glasgow if there is any hope of securing action to slow climate change. Inside, thousands of delegates, and walking among them world leaders, including from France, the Netherlands.
I'm mildly optimistic. I hope we will move from the blah, blah, blah to the actions.
Denmark.
I think it is a problem that China is not attending this meeting.
Why aren't you doing more?
But Australia's Scott Morrison not saying a word. Then, in a huge room, a gathering of immense power, with the weight of the world on their shoulders, in the face of a darkening threat, shown to them in a stark video.
Periods of early frost, the frequency of hurricanes.
Those who could hold the key to the solution watching on in shock.
It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow.
Sir David Attenborough took to the stage and put record levels of carbon dioxide into historical perspective. But he said they could stop this.
In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. That desperate hope, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, excellency, is why the world is looking to you.
Outside the hall, he made the point in a different way.
How worried are you about success?
Sorry. There you go. What I do.
Praying.
Some parts of the world need those prayers answered now, like Bangladesh, where villagers were forced out of their homes just yesterday by rising sea levels, a reality felt by the country's foreign minister in Glasgow.
They say that in next 30 years, 25% of Bangladesh will go underwater. The big countries should learn probably from Bangladesh, because in our NDC, we have announced that we will do away with 10 coal-based power plants. I mean, that's a huge commitment for a country like Bangladesh, who is energy hungry.
The big countries again. The Chinese president, a no-show. The American, understanding the scale.
This is a challenge of our collective lifetimes.
but not yet delivering the policy. And the Indian Prime Minister with a new, improved short-term climate plan, but only pledging net zero by 2070, a timeline that has disappointed environmentalists.
ITV News. Do you think India's doing enough to resolve the issue of climate change?
And there it is again. He and the rest of the world hoping that it is. Anushka Astana, ITV News.
Well, despite the dangers of failing to act, many are going to need convincing to do their bit. And to help persuade them, the Royals were rolled out in Glasgow today. Prince Charles called on global businesses to use trillions of pounds to move economies away from relying on oil and fossil fuels. And the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge heard from young people calling for change. Here's our Royal editor, Chris Shipp.
For a man who's been warning about the environment for half a century now, Prince Charles knows this meeting more than any other he's been to in the last 50 years is a moment to press home his message. And the government knows it too, which is why he was being put in the same room as some of the world's biggest polluting countries like India and those most vulnerable to sea level rises like Barbados. His walk onto the main stage faltered a little, but his message to the world leaders did not.
The cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of prevention. So I can only urge you to find practical ways of overcoming differences to rescue this precious planet and save the threatened future of our young people.
A couple of miles from the conference, some of those young people were with his son and daughter-in-law. William and Kate were scattering wildflower seeds with a scout group, and despite their young age, the scouts did know what the world leaders are doing in their city.
I'm worried about the world because there's not much trees left, and it all just looks like a dump. Reduce factories and coal emissions and make greener power plants.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will join the politicians at tonight's reception, but there will be one notable royal absentee. The Queen was seen driving in Windsor today after being told by her doctors she could not travel to Glasgow. She has recorded a video message instead. As it's coming from the world's longest-serving head of state, Boris Johnson is hoping everyone gathered here will listen to what she has to say. Chris Shipp, ITV News, at COP26 in Glasgow.
Now, of course, it's not just world leaders attending this two-week conference. Thousands of delegates are here, along with many protesters too. Among them is Greta Thunberg, who today accused politicians of pretending to care. Well, let's go over to our Scotland correspondent, Peter Smith. So, Peter, the protesters are a really big part, aren't they, of this?
Absolutely. We've got more than 100 world leaders on that side of the ring of steel, 30,000 delegates. But on this side of the fence, hundreds of thousands of protesters coming to the city to have their voice heard. Among their number, the most famous climate protester of them all, Greta Thunberg. And today, she attended her first COP protest in Glasgow. She has a pass for the conference. She could have had an audience with just about any world leader, but instead she came to a park in one of the poorest parts of the city and she set out her stall.
Inside COP, they're just politicians and people in power pretending to take our future seriously, pretending to take the present seriously of the people who are being affected already today by the climate crisis. Change is not going to come from inside there. That is not leadership. This is leadership. This is what leadership looks like.
Now, Greta Thunberg's drawing a line here that it's about us protesters and them in there, and they can't be relied on to make solutions and stick to them, that the real change is going to be driven by protesters, the power of protest on the streets of Glasgow for the next fortnight.
OK, Peter Smith in Glasgow. Thank you. The summit here has four main aims: to set tougher goals for reducing emissions by 2030 and to keep any temperature increases within the 1.5 Celsius target, to protect communities and natural habitats most at risk of climate change, and to persuade developed countries to provide $100 billion worth of climate finance for poorer countries every year, and for the world to work together to tackle the crisis. The changes required pose a real challenge to businesses and communities who rely on oil and gas, like those who've benefited from the huge reserves off the coast of Aberdeenshire. But as our correspondent Rachel Younger reports, they are preparing for a cleaner future.
150 miles northeast of Glasgow lies a city whose wealth depends on gas and oil. The very stuff COP26 must persuade the world to leave behind. But Aberdeen's already turning away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy, building a new harbour to serve vast floating wind farms.
Aberdeen has become at the centre of excellence for offshore engineering and offshore work more generally, and a lot of the skills that have been developed and finessed over the last 50 years are transferable onto the renewable sector.
On the other side of the city, helicopters ferry all workers to and from the rigs. 40,000 jobs here still rely on the oil and gas industry, which Hamish is just starting out in, aware he'll need to be nimble.
I feel if you work offshore, you could really go anywhere. If you were looking, most companies are doing renewables now, so if you were looking, I think you'd get the help you need.
But the talk away from the cameras at a nearby pub among his older colleagues is more pessimistic. There's a fear some will be left behind.
Currently, our offshore oil and gas workers are thousands of pounds out of pocket, investing in training they're not sure they actually need. But at the same time, it is unrealistic to expect the same level of salaries as the oil and gas used to provide.
The task of protecting both livelihoods and the planet while keeping the lights on, as unforgiving as the sea itself.
As COP host, the UK has to lead by example, and it was the first major economy to commit to reducing its carbon emissions to net zero. But despite that, the government is still licensing gas and oil fields here in the North Sea. And that's not a great look for a country trying to persuade others to reduce their emissions quickly.
This places a reminder that while practical solutions exist, only political will can ever really turn the tide. Rachel Younger, ITV News, Aberdeen.
And our political editor, Robert Peston, is here with me now. So, Robert, after all you've seen and heard today, are you more or less hopeful that we might get success out of this?
Well, I've set myself a task of trying to see everything as glass half full rather than empty, although I have to say the world's leaders do make that a little bit challenging. The big story today was India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi saying two slightly contradictory things. On the one hand, he wants India to be a net zero emitter of greenhouse gases by 2070. Now, some would say that's 20 or even perhaps 30 years too late. But he has set new targets for 2030. The share of the Indian economy, which will, or the Indian power, which will be provided by renewables. And actually, most analysts think that what he said there is positive and ambitious. But funnily enough, it was something else completely about Modi that really struck me. He wants the rich countries to provide $1 trillion of finance to help poorer countries adjust to this new climate-friendly world that we need. And actually, I think the outcome of this conference will be determined by whether the West is generous in helping those poorer countries adapt. If they're not, then I'm afraid I will see the glass as half empty.
OK, Robert, thank you. Still to come on this special ITV Evening News from Glasgow, the terrifying testimony of those on board the train that crashed in Salisbury, and how climate change got the soaps to work together for the very first time. All that and the rest of the day's news after the break. Stay with us. Hello again, welcome back to Glasgow, where it is the first day of the COP26 Climate Change Summit, and we will have more on that in just a moment. First is some of the day's other news, and a train driver has suffered life-changing injuries in a rail crash in Salisbury. 13 passengers were injured when two trains collided in a tunnel last night. From the scene, here's our correspondent, Rupert Evelyn.
Two trains travelling the same way tried to enter a tunnel at the same time. The result is mangled wreckage, the driver with life-changing injuries, and questions over how something that shouldn't be possible has happened. Investigators are focusing on how the rail infrastructure and all the safety equipment that goes with it allowed two trains to smash into each other. There is a 20-mile-per-hour restriction at the Salisbury Tunnel junction. That speed limit was probably the difference between life and death for for many of those on board.
I think that was a godsend. Yes, I think if we'd been going much faster, obviously the outcome could have been much worse.
You could see smoke around the whole entire carriage, and you smell of fuel. Everyone started panicking because everyone thought it was going to catch alight. And then some of the girls and boys started saying to their parents that they loved them in case they died or whatever. So it was quite a traumatic experience.
Initial confusion and terror in the tunnel for passengers quickly turned to a major incident for the emergency services. Initial reports suggested a GWR train had hit something, knocking out signalling, and then a Southwestern train had ploughed into the back of it. That theory has now been all but ruled out by police.
We are keeping an open mind, but at this early stage, there has been nothing to suggest the train struck an object or that there was any significant delay between the trains colliding and then one derailing.
2 people, including one of the drivers, are still in hospital. Given the damage to train and tunnel, officials say it's likely to be some time before the wreckage can be removed. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Salisbury.
The UK says it will take legal action against France if it carries out its threat to disrupt trade from midnight. It follows the escalating row over post-Brexit fishing licences. Boris Johnson met French President Emmanuel Macron here earlier, but officials are still negotiating behind the scenes. Our political correspondent Romilly Weeks is in Westminster. Romilly, what is the latest then on those negotiations?
Well, Mary, the body language today between the Prime Minister and President Macron looked pretty jovial, but the rhetoric between the two countries has been anything but. We have the looming deadline of midnight tonight set by the French for the UK to issue more licences to French fishing boats or face British boats being banned from French ports. And then today, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss piled ultimatum on ultimatum, giving the French 48 hours to withdraw their threat, or the UK would trigger the Brexit dispute resolution mechanism. Now, today, Jersey did agree to issue more temporary licences to French boats, and there are ongoing talks in Brussels today. Whether that's enough to cool the ire of the French, we'll find out in the early hours.
Romilly Weeks, thank you. On some other news now, and a 16-year-old has been sentenced over the attempted murder of a schoolboy. He's shot in the face in Kesgrave near Ipswich. Jacob Talbot Lummis faces 24 years in custody. He lay in wait with his grandfather's double-barrel shotgun as his 15-year-old victim walked to school last September. And appointments are no longer needed for coronavirus booster jabs across England. Over 50s who had their second dose at least 6 months ago are among those who are eligible. And finally, people and politicians hoping for genuine change here in Glasgow will have the support of an unusual ally from tonight. Britain's most popular soaps, from Corrie to Emmerdale and EastEnders, are joining forces to highlight the issues at stake. The one-week special will even see characters appear in rival programmes. Here's our arts editor Nina Nana on what could be their most groundbreaking storyline yet.
Even TV's fictional worlds have been talking about it. But this week, Britain's soaps are taking the climate change conversation one step further.
Yeah, you've seen this, right? So I was online, and there's a doctor in a village in Yorkshire, and he's been growing veg for the community. Reckons it's helped his mental health. Wouldn't mind trying some of them dance moves.
Oh, so what's all this then?
Sustainability. I'm reducing food miles.
That doctor is Dr. Liam Kavanagh. That village is Emmerdale. Meanwhile, over on Hollyoaks...
I was just reading this article about this woman in Weatherfield. We need more people like Maria Connor and like you.
Coronation Street's Maria Connor says the soaps are in uncharted territory.
It's completely unique, and I was really shocked when I heard, because we sort of go out of our way not to usually cross-contaminate, I want to say, the soaps. But with this, it's been such a brilliant idea, and it's a really unique opportunity for us all to kind of get together to cover this climate change message.
From Weatherfield to Walford, Holby City to Hollyoaks, continuing dramas have a long tradition of competing with each other for viewers and for awards. This truce marks an unprecedented collaboration between some of the most watched programmes on British television.
Across the week, the dramas will cross-reference each other, with characters even popping up on different sets. Many will continue their climate change stories.
So this is Dr. Liam, the character I play. So this is his allotment.
Emmerdale's allotment is more than just a plot line.
This isn't just going to be, set dressing. Actually, we're going to use a lot of the vegetables and the fruits and the herbs and whatever for the canteen.
Sustainability. Heard of it?
Sometimes real life is just too dramatic to ignore. Nina Nanar, ITV News.
And that all starts in Emmerdale tonight, straight after the break. But for me, that's all for now. Julie will be live here in Glasgow with news at 10 from me and all the team here. Bye-bye.